Hi everyone, welcome and thanks for joining. My name is Catherine Gutermuth and I'm a marketing manager here at LinkedIn, and today I'm thrilled to welcome Glen Cathey to this webcast. Glen is a VP at Randstad Sorcerer, and many of you may also know him as the author of the hugely popular Boolean Black Belt blog. He's here to share his expert tips for Boolean search and sourcing on LinkedIn. One quick housekeeping note before we get started. We'll be taking questions today via Twitter. So if you'd like to ask Glen a question, please tweet it with the hashtag HireToWin. That's HireTowin, all one word. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to Glen. Glen, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you very much, Catherine. Okay, so for those who are not familiar with me, I am Glen Cathey. I'm the VP of Sourcing and Recruiting. I run a Sourcing and Recruiting Center of Expertise for Randstad Sorcerer, which is Randstad's RPO offering. I do have over 16 years of professional staffing experience, mostly geared towards IT and engineering, although I have touched what you can see on the screen as well as many other verticals. I've definitely hired and trained many sources and recruiters. I do have the blog that Catherine had mentioned. And I've also done quite a bit of speaking, of course, at LinkedIn Talent Connect. Definitely hoping to be there again this year, as well as at SourceCon. And just for fun facts, I think it just rose a couple spots this week alone to being the number 23 most connected person on LinkedIn globally. So I'm not going to waste any time. I'm actually going to jump right into the Boolean aspect, but I'm sure that with the large number of attendees, we have a wide range of skill and knowledge level. So I'm going to start out with some of the more basic things and then run through some of the more sophisticated ways that you can leverage LinkedIn. And if anyone's curious, I will be covering everything from using a free account all the way up to LinkedIn Recruiter and everything in between. So first things first, we're going to cover the main Boolean operators. I won't spend too much time on the and, although I continue to run across many people that don't realize you don't actually have to type and. It does have to be capitalized if you're going to write it, but if you're not going to write it, just use a space. It's an implied and. Or is not either or is at least one of. They can be used for concepts. I'm going to actually expand that in a couple of slides. The not operator, you can capitalize it if you like, or you can simply use the minus sign. There's two main ways to use that. That would be to eliminate false positives. The definition of a false positive is when the results come back and the profile has the keywords you want on it, but the person isn't a match to what you're looking for in terms of an ideal candidate, and also to be able to run mutually exclusive searches, which I will demonstrate later in the deck today. Then we have, of course, two basic query modifiers. They're not Boolean operators, they're modifiers. Quotation marks for exact phrases, so for 2 or 3 or more words. Then you say, you're going to tell LinkedIn, I only want to see this exact phrase. Some people forget that if you don't use quotes, you're essentially saying one word and another word, which means they don't have to be in a phrase in close proximity. Parentheses should be used, good syntax to be able to encapsulate and define your or statements. I have a basic query on the right that you can see in the blue box. That's actually leveraging quotation marks, phrase search, parenthetical or statement, showing how you actually do have to search for abbreviations with periods as well, because it is seen as a little bit different. And then, of course, using the minus sign to get rid of what I would consider to be a false positive in this case if I don't want a construction project manager. And then, of course, not supported on LinkedIn is the asterisk, which, again, many people actually use the asterisk on LinkedIn and don't realize that it doesn't work because your search still runs. It just won't pull all the permutations of the root word that you're searching for. So if you put in manage, it won't pull up managed, management, managing. And, of course, proximity is not supported on LinkedIn search. And, again, this is all different levels from free up to LinkedIn Recruiter. So the or, I always like to take a moment to explain why or is so powerful. When I've done the LinkedIn Talent Connect conferences several times now, I continue to be surprised by people that don't really leverage the or operator that often, and definitely not on a daily basis. There's two main uses. So use number one is to get lucky. Basically, I actually took a real job off of Indeed and to put that in the upper right-hand corner. What you're looking at is a large list of desired skills. Some of the recruiters on the call are probably saying, yeah, I see that all the time from my hiring managers. Well, you don't need all of those things, so why not put them into an or statement and basically say, well, look, I only need at least one of these things. But if some magical candidate actually happens to have them all, they actually get ranked higher because, remember, it's not either or, it's at least one of. So that actually helps out with relevance. Use number 2 is for searching for concepts or looking for multiple expressions of the same concept. So just a couple of quick examples. And again, we're starting off basic. There might be multiple ways of someone having a particular title or mentioning a particular keyword or even mentioning a verb. So we'll talk about that later when we get into the semantic search aspect. You actually might want to look for verbs in addition to the nouns. In this case, because LinkedIn doesn't support the asterisk, yes, you are going to have to develop those or statements of all the different ways that somebody might actually express that term. And it also applies to companies. Some companies are straightforward. Other companies, people can actually represent it several different ways, and you want to make sure that you're very inclusive. So just 2 different examples of how you use your or. And then we get to not. Trying to be funny there, not used enough. Whenever I poll audiences, there's always a vast minority of the people that actually use the not operator on a regular basis, and I'm not really sure why, because it's quite powerful. The best use, I already talked about the most basic use, which is getting rid of false positives. So number 1 false positive when you're a recruiter and you're not recruiting recruiters on LinkedIn is getting rid of other recruiters that mention the keywords you're looking for. The most powerful way to use it is to create what I call a mutually exclusive search progression. So just as a quick example, let's say I was targeting iOS developers, right? And I can actually put iOS or iPhone explicitly mentioned in the title, which is very predictive, not just the keywords, but in the title, but then also getting rid of some false positive terms that I don't want to see in the title. And then I can see if I was looking in the Bay Area, I could come up with a large number of results, 663. My second search would be mutually exclusive. Now, what I'm doing in this case is I said, okay, I've already seen the people who say iOS or iPhone in their current title. Now I'm looking for people that do not mention iOS or iPhone, but they mention another word that's predictive of them being a mobile developer as opposed to just a regular software engineer that doesn't actually develop a lot of mobile apps. This is another 632 results that are mutually exclusive from the first result set. So it's a really nice way using the not operator to slice and dice the data and never have to see the same candidates twice. One thing I always like to cover, and I'll demonstrate why you might want to care about how long of a search string you can actually enter into LinkedIn. With a basic account for free, you can get away with slightly over 1,000 characters per field. And for some of you, there are actually some situations where you might actually want to search for over 1,000 characters. I'll demonstrate one shortly. LinkedIn Recruiter can actually handle over 3,000 characters per field, and in some cases, I've actually gotten it to run a 3,500 character search. Some of you might be thinking that's overkill, but I'll show you some very practical applications of why you'd want to know this, because the average Sorcerer recruiter that I'm aware of, unfortunately, runs typically anywhere from 3 to 5 keywords. And you're really not leveraging all of LinkedIn's search capability if you're only feeding it, very small searches that are non-specific and they're too basic, and they'll probably return too many results that are not that specific. So I guess we're done, right? That was easy, right? Sourcing on LinkedIn is easy. You know Boolean logic. You know the filters. Those are really self-explanatory, easy to use. Always wanted to use this meme. The reality is there's actually many articles that have actually been published that are talking about the fact that why should we be sourcing on LinkedIn? Everybody is sourcing on LinkedIn. Just as an example, this is a recent article from John that was actually run on SourceCon. It basically says, hey, if you think that everyone is sourcing on LinkedIn, you're right. And in a way, and I know John's angle wasn't this, but in a way, some people immediately have a negative reaction and say, well, if everybody's sourcing there, in this case 97%, sometimes that actually turns people off. There was also an incredibly recent blog post from Suzanne Chadwick, which I really enjoyed, but I just want to point out, it's a great question. She asked, is LinkedIn creating lazy recruitment? And you can see at the bottom, she was talking about the fact that, they were stating from a report that 64% of recruiters actually solely relied on LinkedIn. Now, that could sound scary, but I want to paint a slightly different picture. Let's keep in mind that LinkedIn has over 225 million people on it, okay? You can see some of the countries broken down there. I know we have some folks that are on the call from all over the world. What I've got on the right that I wanted to demonstrate was the fact that, that when I say noise, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. The whole point is the haystack has gotten larger. We have a whole bunch of people on LinkedIn. And our job is to actually find that signal within the noise. The signal is, of course, representative of the right people for our organizations, and quickly find them nonetheless. But what I'd like to point out is, in this picture that's coming up is, I would say that LinkedIn is essentially analogous to the Pacific Ocean when it comes to talent. So it's the largest pool of professional talent that we can tap into, especially that has nice structured data that's highly searchable. And no one would hopefully ever say, wow, there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of people probably all over the world that actually fish the Pacific Ocean, but it would be obviously poor logic to assume that we shouldn't fish there just because other people are fishing there and people fish there a lot. It's because you will never overfish the Pacific Ocean. It's too large. And I would actually say that's a very similar analogy with LinkedIn. Even if everybody on the planet, from a recruiting perspective, was using LinkedIn, they're not bottoming it out. And no two sources tend to run the exact same query, even if they're looking for the same people. So even with some overlap, there are also candidates that are being found that are actually exclusive just to the people running those certain queries. So then the other point I like to make is that sometimes sourcing can look like child's play when it comes to searching on LinkedIn. Anybody can type in keywords from a job description and titles and find profiles that look like this, that it really doesn't take somebody too intelligent to be able to figure out, well, I think this person's a good Oracle developer, or at least definitely worth contacting in terms of the experience they've had. But the issue that we follow up with here is the fact that there are plenty of profiles. In fact, I would argue there's probably more profiles that look like these, and these are all separate profiles that are representative of people. And when they join LinkedIn, they don't necessarily join LinkedIn to create their profile on the level of a CV or resume. And so they're very keyword poor. And as soon as you type a keyword, you actually eliminate these results. And, of course, LinkedIn and no search engine will actually say, you found 32 people, but you eliminated 1,084 people because your search actually excluded them. And this is where people can develop a competitive advantage, is first being aware of these people, and then second, developing a strategy to be able to retrieve them. And then I always like to ask this question, what is the value of data anyway? And you could argue that the text that's on LinkedIn profiles is data that we have to interpret for meaning and information. And I would argue that the true value of data lies in your ability to retrieve it. So this is actually a picture of a really cool library at Yale University. And obviously it's behind glass, and those are rare tomes, but you could be in the world's largest library, but if you don't know how to find the book within the library, just because you have access to a ton of books, it doesn't make you any better than anybody else at quickly finding the right book. LinkedIn is the exact same scenario. You have 225 million global profiles, and it doesn't mean that just because you have access that you're actually any better than anyone else at finding the right people quickly, or the best people that LinkedIn has to offer. And here's where I like to point out, I love this quote that actually came from a gentleman who was behind the technology of Google rankings. So when you run a search on Google, why do you get what you get, especially on the first, second, and third pages? And the quote is, search in the last decade has moved from give me what I said to give me what I want. And I continue to use this quote because, to me, I still find insight in it. We have search engineers that say, okay, we're trying to go beyond keyword search. We're trying to guess the user's intent, right? Because we want to give it to them what they want, not just the exact keywords they're looking for. But I would argue with this quote, respectfully, with Amit, that I don't really think we've gotten that far with any search engine when it comes to figuring out, okay, am I getting what I want or what I said? And what you said is obviously the keywords and the titles and the different filters and facets that you use. What I think that some of you in the call might find fascinating, and I found this fascinating too, although I've been following Daniel for quite some time, I'm a little bit of a fan, that you may not know that LinkedIn actually has a head of search relevance and a head of query understanding. So they have people, they're not the only two on this team, that actually it's their full-time job to try to figure out what is it our users are looking for and how can we better deliver them relevant results. Again, for the more technical folks on the call, I thought you might appreciate seeing the equation, or at least part of an equation that actually talks about how LinkedIn tries to figure out what your intent might be and how it then constructs the results that come back for you. And as you can see, one of the variables is the user. So obviously users get different results. I just thought you guys would find that interesting. So even though they're working on it, and again, I have a lot of respect for LinkedIn to have a head of query understanding, the reality is, let's keep in mind that no database will ever know what you want or need, okay? It can't actually determine relevance, and I always like to explain that relevance, based on the dictionary definition, is the ability of an information retrieval system to retrieve the material that satisfies the needs of the user. Well, you're the user. Only you, when you run a search and look at the results, can tell what was relevant, what actually meets my needs. And another thing I like to point out is that false positives are normal. If you're running a search and every single result looks perfect, I'd probably argue that your search was too specific and you were actually eliminating qualified candidates that just didn't look as good as the one that you would refine your search down to. So false positive results are normal. I look at them all the time. They're just a fact of life when it comes to search. So don't try to over-refine your searches to get rid of all false positives. I think you actually run the risk of excluding individuals that you don't want to exclude. They could be the next great hire for your organization that just didn't mention the right keywords based on your judgment. So I opened up with Boolean, right? So we're talking about sourcing, and really, when I was preparing this presentation, I knew that the main message I wanted to get across to everybody listening in, and anybody that will watch this as a streamed presentation later, is that being a quote-unquote black belt level sourcer, or even a sourcing ninja, whatever you want to call it, has less to do with your mastery of syntax and query format, although obviously you have to have good query syntax. It really comes down to how well do you think, because you can memorize all the search commands and you can do all kinds of very flashy sourcing techniques. The reality is, if you don't have a good sound thought process and methodology to approach information retrieval, you will always be less than what you could be with regard to your sourcing capability. And that's why I always like to point out, I think I'll never stop talking about the fact that sourcing is about information retrieval. It's not so much about Boolean. Boolean logic just happens to be the easiest way to construct a query. And a query is just a formal statement of an information need. If you look up information retrieval in Google, it'll tell you happily that it's a science, and you can see most of the things that come up when you run a search for that are textbooks. So the question becomes, okay, so Glenn, if information retrieval is basically me putting queries in the system, I'm asking a system, do you have this? What is it that I'm asking for? And I'd like to point out that you can break down positions and potential candidates into these critical candidate variables: skills and experience, the opportunity, what the opportunity is, and what the candidate would like as the next step in their career, the location, right, availability of the potential candidate, the remuneration, and then, of course, diversity. So we are actually, when we're trying to run a query on LinkedIn, we're trying to control these variables, or at least you should be, because if you're not, then you're going to be slower when it comes to trying to find the right people. You are going to pull up too many false positives. Some false positives are okay, too many, it basically makes you very slow and you become more of a garbage sifter. And I also like to point out that when it comes to job posting versus sourcing on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is very searchable and actually has structured data, you have a significant advantage if you're better at creating queries and leveraging the different aspects of LinkedIn that gives you a higher degree of predictive control over those critical candidate variables. And even though prior to me explaining that to you, you may not have thought of sourcing in that regard, that's literally what we're trying to do. Because if you're not, then you're just basically throwing keywords in and hoping for the best. In this case, you really want to go into a search and say, I am trying to find people with the right skills that would probably like my job, that will probably accept my commute or the relocation, that even if they're not available, they're actually recruitable, and that the compensation range that I have for my positions are probably closely aligned to that of the people I'm finding. And if diversity is something that's important to myself and the organization, then I'm also hitting upon that criteria as well. So then the next question is, well, how do you actually exert control over those critical candidate variables? Well, here is a breakdown. I won't run through all of them, but some of them are pretty simple and self-explanatory. When it comes to skills and experience and desired opportunity, it's the same. It's keyword, title, company, and group search can help you find people who are not only likely to be qualified in terms of their experience, but also where they are in their career trajectory, more likely to say, the job that you're sourcing for is a good either lateral move or a nice step in the right direction in their career path. Location, somewhat basic, zip code, love that, right? Keyword search, though, too, if you're looking for people that live somewhere else, that used to live in your location. There's travel internationally, and in many cases, there's people in certain countries that are looking to identify expats that used to live in a country, moved away. So we need to actually be able to find where they live, but where they lived before, to increase the probability that they would be interested in coming back to that particular country, perhaps where they grew up or they went to school. Availability is keyword search, and I'll show you how to do that. Some of you that might be a little bit new for, and also signal, which I'll talk about before the end of the presentation. Remuneration we control through title search and years of experience, and again, depending on your level of account with LinkedIn, you can start controlling years of experience overall, years at current company, years in current position, which do translate over into the ability to start exerting some predictive control over what their compensation is likely to be. It's an educated guess. And then, of course, diversity through keyword and group search. So I just alluded to the fact that, well, one of the critical candidate variables is availability. In many cases, I personally don't care if somebody is actively looking for a job. I want the best person, whether they're actively looking for a job or, the probability actually will state they're probably currently doing a good job somewhere else and not thinking of making a move, but that doesn't mean they can't be recruited. In this case, I've put together a string, and it's not the be-all and end-all, and it can be improved, but it does work very well. This is a combination of terms that you can add to any search that will allow you to find people who have taken the time to update their LinkedIn profiles with words telling you, I'm looking for new opportunities. So you literally are solving that availability variable by identifying people that are raising their hand saying, yes, I'm open to new opportunities. If you were, and this is one thing that I hope that I'm a little bit famous for. Basically, I asked the question a while ago, okay, if I needed gender diversity, how would I find that? What would be on a LinkedIn profile of a woman that wouldn't be on the LinkedIn profile of a man? And there's many more answers than what's on this slide, but I did some research in the United States, and many other governments actually track some of this information. I looked at the top 200 most common female names over 4 decades. I deduped them down to 354 first names, which, and by the way, for the people who were thinking I was crazy when I was showing you, well, why would I need to run a 3,000 character search? This is one example of why you could run a 3,500 character search. This search in the U.S. alone finds 67.35% of all women on LinkedIn in the U.S. from a single query, to which all you would have to do is add the other search criteria to find the experience that you're looking for. So just to give you an example, it comes down to what does my information need? In this case, it might be gender diversity, and then we just have to figure out how do I go about constructing a query that meets my needs? And in this case, it's just an or statement. So it's not so much about Boolean, it's about sound information retrieval. So now I always like to break down, and I've actually changed this over the years because things have changed. So I look at things from a search return on investment. So you can look at return on investment, whether it be monetary investment or time investment, or I'd argue probably both. What you're seeing is data depth, the depth of the professional data that you have access to versus searchability. And you'll see that on the left side, below 5 is internet resumes and non-resume information on the internet. I am not saying that you can't find either, and I'm also not saying there isn't valuable information to be had. But when you're using an internet search engine, they were not purpose-built to retrieve human capital data. So it's basically we're using a screwdriver when we really want a hammer, or a butter knife when we really want a scalpel. And the reason why I put LinkedIn where it is because it has a significant data depth, not just profiles that some of them are filled out to the CV level, but as I'll explain in a moment, LinkedIn Recruiter specifically goes above and beyond that with custom fields and additional information, essentially within CRM functionality. So not only do you have basically the CV, but additional information. So for example, If you start thinking about, well, if I'm using LinkedIn Recruiter specifically, I can start adding notes and tags and reviews and add them to specific projects and then reminders, and I can search across those fields. That data is more deep and richer than a CV that you could actually upload into LinkedIn Recruiter or a relatively well filled out LinkedIn profile. This, in turn, allows you to exert even more predictive control over the types of skills, experience, desired opportunity, location, and remuneration based on notes and tags that you could leverage. So now you're going beyond keyword search in a sense and actually looking into specific things like tags. And although you're using keywords to search tags, you could actually, after screening somebody, add so much additional information that you know exactly what the right match is for that person and retrieve that person instantly when you need them. Again, for people that don't use LinkedIn Recruiter and have ever considered it, what I like to look at is these additional fields like willing to relocate, candidate interest, work authorization, office location, expected salary, availability date. Now, unfortunately, right now, they're not searchable, but as you can even see from LinkedIn's notes, they're actually working on it right now. So as soon as that's unlocked, now you're talking about even deeper and richer human capital data, which you can have access to in LinkedIn Recruiter. A couple quick things I just want to throw down, and again, this goes back to, I opened up with Boolean. I'm sure people are probably, and I have more strings to show you, but I really want people to, the main takeaway of this call is you have to think properly in order to be a very good sourcer. It's not so much about search strings or custom search engines, things like that. They'll work, but if you're going to leverage 225 million global profiles, close to 80 million in the U.S. alone, that's a very large Pacific Ocean of talent that I would argue most people are only scraping the surface of. And when I was doing some research in the past, I came across this term called human-computer information retrieval. What I thought was fascinating, this term was actually coined back in 2004, and the main focus was that it empowers people to explore large-scale information bases, which LinkedIn certainly qualifies, but it demands that people take responsibility for this control by expending cognitive and physical energy. The reason why I'm taking time to walk you through this is because you have to think before you search, and you have to think from search to successive search. And I find that that's one of the things that actually doesn't happen enough with the average sourcer or recruiter that's using LinkedIn to source. Another quote that stuck with me for quite a long time is actually from Aiji Toyota. Very, very wise quote. I actually think it came from all the way back in 1983. Society has reached the point where we can push a button and be immediately deluged with information, which is all very convenient, of course, but if one is not careful, there's a danger of losing the ability to think. We must remember that in the end, it's the individual human being who must solve the problem. So when it comes to sourcing, you can imagine it is a problem. We have to translate an entire job description, the requirements, the manager's intake, all down to a query, right, that will hopefully very quickly help us identify the right people. I also think some people will be fascinated by this. If you don't know who Nate Silver is, he's the author of a really interesting book, The Signal and the Noise, and one of his biggest claims to fame is that he recently correctly predicted 50 out of 50 states in the 2012 presidential election. So he definitely dabbles in the data science arena. And this actually came out of the latest Fast Company magazine, a couple quotes, The Flood of Data, which I would argue that we have a good flood. It's not a bad thing at all when it comes to LinkedIn having so much data, is that it does create more noise. And I don't mean noise in terms of bad candidates. We're just talking about I put in my keywords and I get lots of results back. But only some of the results in the whole set are actually the signal from the noise, the people who are the right people who are the highest in alignment to those critical candidate variables, which is what we're trying to find. I like to point out, too, that he says often we expect too much of computers and not enough of ourselves. People blame systems when they should be asking better questions, which segues into, again, the core message of this presentation is you need to learn how to ask better questions of LinkedIn when you're sourcing. The first set of questions are, why does the average person, a non-recruiter or a non-salesperson or a non-multi-level marketer, right, join LinkedIn? And that actually is it seems like such a simple question, but I've actually worked with very senior talent acquisition professionals who will tell me, well, Glenn, if they don't mention the skill, then they must not be good at it. And then I always remind them with that question, well, why are you assuming that all qualified people on LinkedIn are going to mention every single thing that they've done? And as you know, many people actually join LinkedIn for the social networking aspect, and they're not going on there to fill out their profile as if it were a CV, right? And then also ask yourself this, why would somebody who wasn't looking for a job even bother to fill their LinkedIn profile to the depth of a resume? I mean, obviously fill it out to some extent, but they're not filling it out in totality. Then, the next set of better questions you have to ask yourself is, would everybody on LinkedIn with the skills and experience I need explicitly mention it? And if I could boil this presentation down to one slide that's the most critical takeaway, it is this slide. I find too many people don't have a disciplined, interrogative approach when searching on LinkedIn and then thinking first. Because, for example, could you tell if that business analyst had UML? Or any SQL experience, or any particular experience? You can't, because this person created the LinkedIn profile and simply said, hey, I work at ING as a business analyst. Now, this could be the best business analyst in your market, but they wouldn't look like it on the surface, and as soon as you run a search and type in something like and SQL, right, or even and requirements, or and UML, this person is excluded. Yet they could be the best next hire for your organization, and probably is more indicative of a passive candidate. I would also like to ask this question. How often do you think that person, that business analyst, gets an in-mail? Not very often. Well, if they don't get in-mails very often, what do you think the response rate would be? You see how it's all about asking better questions. The next important question is, how many ways could somebody possibly express the skills and experience that I'm looking for? So just a real quick snippet, right? This person says BSA, first off, business systems analyst, senior systems analyst, and a requirements analyst. In not one place on their profile do they ever say business analyst. So if you were looking for a business analyst and you type that search, this person would be excluded. That's why these questions are so critical. You have to think before you search, and you have to learn how to ask questions of LinkedIn more intelligently. Now, it's not asking these questions that leads to two main hidden talent pools on LinkedIn. The first one is there are people that you exclude. So as soon as you type a skill, that a person with that skill who didn't actually type it into the LinkedIn profile, they are excluded, and they enter that hidden talent pool. Now, once you're aware of this, you can then go back and find them, and we'll talk about how to do that. The second hidden talent pool is people that you overlook or you don't review. The most classic example of this is the people that run very basic and imprecise searches work. It will return a result, and it will return, unfortunately, too many with a high degree of false positives. And so if you got 500 results back, you know, many recruiters, when I ask them, they might say, I'll look at 30, 50, maybe 100. My question is, what if the best people are in the remainder of the search results you never reviewed? And most people don't really have an answer to that. And then my second follow-up question would be, what do you know how to actually go back and find those people specifically without actually having to wade through the people you've already looked at? Well, I have a methodology for that we'll talk about in a moment. So just as a few, you know, some people are probably thinking, okay, great theories, Glenn. These are actually not theories. These have been borne out by personal experience over 16 years of information retrieval, and it applies similarly to LinkedIn. In fact, I would even say more so to LinkedIn, because these are not CVs. Some of them are filled out like CVs, many are not. So what we're looking at here on the left is somebody that if you were looking for a senior director of pharmacovigilance, right, and they had to have either a PhD or a medical degree, if you were searching for a PhD or medical degree, you would actually exclude this candidate. The reality is, if you look at the bottom, there's a clue there. Back early in their career, they were a physician. If you actually do a little bit of research, even if you know nothing in this area, physicians are typically MDs. In fact, I think it's almost 100%, it's not even implied, it is a fact. And then you look at the pharmacovigilance person at the top. The only experience they entered on their profile was from October 2012 to present. But I can guarantee you they did not graduate college, and their first job out of university was in October of 2012 as an immediate director of pharmacovigilance. This is a good example of hidden talent, because if you were using a filter to look for, oh, I want to find someone that has 10 years of experience, this person would be excluded. Yet I would almost guarantee you that they have more than 10 years of experience, they just didn't enter it on their profile. There are, I can't even begin to estimate how many of these people have profiles like this. The reality is you have to run special searches to even retrieve them. But I would argue that there's more people like this than the super keyword-rich profiles that everybody finds, which means that even if 97% of all recruiters are searching on LinkedIn, it's not creating lazy recruiters. It's actually, it's actually creating a huge opportunity for people to get more value out of LinkedIn if they know how to leverage proper information retrieval best practices to retrieve them. Just two more quick examples. That piping field engineer, some of you are probably appreciating that that person never says engineer. They say ENG''R, and to make it even worse, they actually abbreviated mechanical to MECH''L. As soon as you type in engineer or mechanical, this person cannot be retrieved, but they're there for those who know how to get them. And another thing I'd like to point out about this developer on the bottom is that, I actually just wasn't even searching for it, but I look for things like that Ajax 4 JSF. If you were searching for Ajax, you would not retrieve them because it's not by itself. And since there's no stemming functionality, if you typed an Ajax, this person could not be retrieved because they don't say Ajax. It's actually a word, Ajax 4 JSF. Another quick example of the second hidden talent pool. Let's say you're in the Bay Area and you're looking for mobile developers and you run a relatively basic search. Some of you that don't recruit in this space might be amazed at the fact that there's almost 13,000 people that meet that basic search criteria in one area. And so my question to you is, how many results do you review when you search? Usually I hear 30, 50, 100 maybe. And then how many results can you review? So with a free account, it's 100. With the different accounts, it goes up to 300 to 500. With LinkedIn Recruiter, it's 1,000. But here we would still be leaving behind, over 10,000 people that you simply can't even retrieve in a single query because they're beyond the veil of 1,000. And then the last powerful question is, how many people do you overlook just because you don't like the look of the profile or you don't see enough of the right information? And just remember, it's just a profile. Please don't judge people just based on their profiles. So going back to my theme of sourcing is more about asking the right questions. So let's say I was looking for a salesperson and they had to have specific experience selling enterprise content management software. Well, literally, if I think in terms of questions, it's almost like go fish. LinkedIn, do you have any salespeople who sell enterprise content management software? And then your next two follow-up questions are, how many different ways could somebody talk about selling? And then how many different ways could somebody talk about ECM software? So in the blue box I'm showing you, that's a title search for sales. Or we could look for sales-related terminology. There's two different ways of running a search. One is for exact titles, another is for a combination. So for people who kind of appreciate the nuances or elegant queries, that's just two expressions of the exact same question. Both will work perfectly. And then when you look at the keywords is simply, it's two or statements that basically are concepts of enterprise content management and all the different ways that somebody can mention it. That's not complete. That's pretty complete, but there's more terms we could add. The point is, when you start running queries like this that answer these questions, it's not about taking words off the job description or from the hiring manager. Of course, you start there. But when we take this information, we can start writing queries like this, which are literally just questions. How many different ways could they mention sales? How many different ways could they mention ECM? And when you write queries like that, you start to get highly relevant results like these people. So again, even if you've never recruited salespeople that have sold enterprise content management, it doesn't take a rocket doctor to look at these results and say, wow, that's a high degree of relevance. So again, asking better questions in the form of your queries will get you better answers or results. Some of you, have seen me say this. I think I'll probably be presenting to this slide honestly, till the day I die. It's a brilliant quote from the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, who I do think would have been an awesome sorcerer. Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I'll take the first 4 to sharpen the axe. Some people are probably thinking, why are you busting out a lumberjack analogy on me? So I'll do my own quote. Give me 60 minutes to find the right people, and I'll spend the first 15 minutes refining my search strings. And if you look up the word refine, you get a number of interesting things, which is really what we're trying to do in the first 15 minutes. Improve by pruning or polishing the search, to try to make it more pure to more relevant results, right? To make improvements to by introducing subtleties or distinctions. And we'll talk about exactly how you can do that. So again, for some people that might be lost on that Abraham Lincoln axe quote, this is what it really means when we say, what if I just started swinging at a tree with a dull axe versus what if I took a little bit of time, like 15 minutes, to sharpen my search strings or my axe in this case? So I just want you to think about this. When you run a search, what is the ratio of relevant to irrelevant results? Is it 50 out of 500, 50 out of 200, or 50 out of 100? It's actually quite a big difference. And then you really have to be concerned about where are the relevant results distributed. Do not assume that just because the people ranked at the top, no matter how you sort them, are the best people. They just happen to be the people that actually match the keyword frequency criteria. And obviously, there's a whole bunch more going on in terms of the search. I showed you that a little bit earlier. But there's no way to run a search and know that the best candidate is number 1 and the worst candidate is number 1,000. It simply doesn't work that way. In fact, I could actually show you people that are the best candidates that are number 1,000 out of 1,000. Keyword density has nothing to do with how good a person is at their job. So another thing, hopefully making you think quite a bit, are the best results evenly distributed out of your 100, 200, or 500? Are they randomly distributed, or are they skewed towards the first 50? And could you skew them? And how long does it take you to identify 15 to 20 highly relevant results when you start searching? A day, half a day, or 30 minutes? If you refine your search strings for the first 15 minutes, you can find a good quantity of high-quality results within a very short period of time, which is the goal. That's called working smart. That's getting maximum value, return on time invested out of LinkedIn. So one of the things that we can bring to bear that we actually specifically developed is a methodology called the Agile sourcing methodology, which borrows from Agile software development, which is basically a plan, do, check, act, and a continuous process improvement cycle where we gather requirements, we develop and execute an initial query. It's usually very basic but specific, and we search across all of LinkedIn. So even if my job were Atlanta, I would search all of LinkedIn. And I'm going to review the top search results, specifically looking for patterns of false positives that I could exploit and eliminate. And 3B is probably the most critical piece. Also inspecting results outside of my highlighted terms because I know they're there because I searched for them. I need to find all of the other ways that the people who do the job that I need them to do talk about their skills and experience. Then I take those related and relevant terms, I fold them into my search, I create my second iteration. So I'll run a second search, and I'll do this again, and I'll inspect the results, and I'll gather some more words. So that's how you can very quickly build out those concepts. And then finally, when you have a search that you think is very highly focused and very inclusive and specific, then I would focus it on your particular location. This is just a quick example. So even if you've never looked at a job like mechatronics engineer, this is the power of this type of methodology. So you could literally say, LinkedIn, what do you make of quote-unquote mechatronics engineer? And then you look at some results, you take out words, and you'll see the box that I have on the right, the top box, is actually a list of words that I personally gleaned off of LinkedIn profiles of people that said mechatronics engineer nationally. And then I did a second search, and then my third search, my third iteration, is the search you see in the bottom left. So I've basically said, this is a question. LinkedIn, find me your mechatronics engineers that don't necessarily say quote-unquote mechatronics engineer. And now you get a result like the individual in the lower right, who is, in essence, a mechatronics engineer, and he doesn't even mention the word mechatronics once. I would have never been able to do this off the top of my head, but I can do it using a methodology that allows me to leverage, our inherent ability to perform pattern recognition, and again, to sharpen that axe or refine our search strings for 5 to 15 minutes before we just plug in a few keywords and go and get sloppy, non-precise results. And then I wanted to introduce you to the concept of a sourcing maturity model, which is basically a capability model that represents the maturity of either an individual or an organization's formally documented and optimized sourcing methodologies, and essentially the degree of sophistication or capability with regard to their capacity to extract value out of human capital data. And I'll just run through the 6 levels. So levels 1 and 2 is typically what you want to avoid, although they're very common. That's what I would call usual and customary search. Level 1 is basically I take keywords and titles directly off the job description and I plug them in and I hit a search. The problem with that is it works. It's a good thing. That's why anybody can run a keyword search. If you're looking for an accountant and you put accountant in the title field, you will get accountants. It's not very difficult. Level 2 is basic conceptual search, and this is where the person's enlightened to the point where they say, well, maybe they wouldn't just say accountant, maybe they would be an accounting specialist, or maybe there's a number of different ways that someone would talk about being certified. So that's where they start leveraging or statements to expand those concepts. Level 3 is a more exhaustive version of the conceptual search. So when you saw the query that I was demonstrating before with regard to the salesperson that had to have experience with enterprise content management, that was an advanced conceptual search. You know, I had 10 to 14 different ways of expressing the things that I was looking for. Level 4 is implicit search, which I'll demonstrate in a moment. That's looking for people that don't mention exactly what you're looking for, but mention terms that imply the right experience. Level 5 is natural language or semantic search, which typically involves leveraging verbs and nouns because we're not looking for a bag of skills. We're looking for people who have done things. And if a company has paid someone to have a responsibility is comprised of verbs and nouns. And then last but not least is indirect search, which is where we can leverage LinkedIn to find people who are not the right match for the job, but are highly likely to know the right people. So, for example, calling a project manager to get a business analyst or a developer. And it really doesn't matter if it's IT or not. All you have to do is start thinking of, well, who works with and who would have known someone in their career that is highly likely to be a good match for my job. So a couple quick examples as we run towards the end of the presentation. Here's an example of performing implicit search. So let's say I'm looking for somebody that has Agile experience, but I've already found everyone who says the word Agile. Well, what we could do is run a one-word search, Agile, and ask LinkedIn, show me the top companies. Now, this is using a premium account because you're only going to see the top 5 companies with a free account, but when you have a premium account, you actually see 12. So for the people who are going to pick up on this quick, I basically said, in a particular market, Boston area, show me all the companies where people have profiles and they talk about Agile. I take those top 12 companies, then I run a second search, and I exclude them from the current company, and then you'll see the second image on the right is actually a mutually exclusive result set because I said you can't currently work at any of the other previous 12 companies. And now, within a matter of 3 minutes, I have a list of 24 companies in the Boston area that have people that work there that say they work with the Agile methodology. And now you'll notice at search 3, I have to exclude Agile because I've already seen everyone who explicitly mentions it, yet I could then search for people who have worked for one of those companies because it would be implied that there's a higher probability chance that they'd actually work with it. So that's what we call implicit search. Another good example is one that I actually touched upon recently, was looking for people who mention a physician but don't mention that they have a medical degree. Because this person does have a medical degree, they just don't say that in terms of their education field. If you were to search for that, you would actually exclude them. And then another really cool feature of LinkedIn Recruiter Only is LinkedIn's any group functionality. Because you're not limited to just searching your groups, you can search any of the million-plus LinkedIn groups. And being a member of certain groups has a degree of has a predictive degree of control over somebody's interest in what they do. What I've done here is I'm looking for people who do not say the word pharmacovigilance anywhere on their profile, yet they're in a member of a group that's pharmacovigilance related. And you start pulling up these individuals and say, oh, there are people who actually have the skills I need that do not explicitly mention it, but now I can actually search for groups that would imply that they have the right experience. Another quick example of that is, well, Here's a good question. LinkedIn, do you have any people who have Red Hat experience that do not mention Red Hat on their profile? This is a way to basically ask that question of LinkedIn. You exclude explicit mention of Red Hat because you've already depleted them. You've already found all of those people. And then you use the IndyGroup feature to start typing in all the Red Hat groups that exist. And now you can find hundreds of people who are Linux engineers who are highly likely to actually have Red Hat experience, yet anyone who types and Red Hat could never find these people because it's not on their profile. A quick example of semantic search is very, very basic, but I wanted to get some people out of the whole, wow, I didn't realize all I do is search for nouns because I'm looking for skill terms and titles. You can look for verbs. Well, think, what is this person responsible for doing? Well, the first query is basically, I want somebody who is responsible for designing databases. Well, you can see, you can find database design under the skill list, and you can see, design and implementation of databases. Oracle database design. And then also down on the bottom, we're looking for people who have done bank or financial statement or account statement reconciliation. We put in some verbs with the nouns, and we find people who say, yes, I have reconciled bank accounts. So we're going beyond the nouns and looking for people who mention sentences in which they say, I have done what you need me to have done, which is a good degree of predictive variable control. One of the more advanced techniques that we can apply to LinkedIn is what we call probabilistic and exhaustive sourcing. This is based on the theory of, well, why would I not search for somebody who meets the maximum qualifications first? That's all the basic qualifications, BQs, plus the PQs, the preferred qualifications, and then use the not operator to basically make sure that I run through highest probability, maximum qualifications, all the way down to just the BQs. And just as a quick example, if you needed someone that had 3 years as a business analyst with some data skills, but you had multiple desired skills like e-commerce experience, ERP experience, crystal reports experience, retail and inventory, your first search is for everything. And LinkedIn in one city will return 2 people. But you found the 2 people who, based on explicit mention, actually have every single thing on their profile. Now, if you run a basic search, you'd probably get 1,000 in a large metro area. In fact, in New York, if you run that search, you would actually get over 5,000. But there's only 2 people out of the entire market that say, I mention all these things. Then your second search is to start systematically removing some of the desired skills so that you find 3, 3, 7, 3, 10, 39. So in 7 quick searches, you can find people from highest probability of match to lower probability of match, at least based on explicit mention of keywords. And just to round out the end, I'd like to point out some people may or may not have this interface yet. If you do, it actually confused me a bit first, I'll admit it. One of the first questions I got was, wow, where do I go to find LinkedIn skills? How do I search groups? What they've done with their federated search or unified search is that when you use the main search bar, you can type in a word, and you'll notice that you got to be patient. Look at everything that comes up. First they say search for people, search for groups, search for jobs. Then it has your connections. Then it has companies. Then it has groups. Then it has skills. So that's the beauty of federated search. It searches, you give it one thing or a term or a phrase, and it searches everywhere and says, you pick where you want to go with this query. And I call it Voltron search because you can see in the bottom that I believe that's the code word for it. And it makes sense because essentially, all the cats are the groups, connections, skills. That's why they call it federated or unified search for those who actually follow that analogy. Skills and expertise still exists. I actually helped somebody on Google Plus just the other day. They were like, help, LinkedIn skills went away. It has not gone away. You can still navigate it through the federated search that I just showed you. Just type a basic keyword in the keyword field and wait for the pre-populated list to come up. The last category is going to be skills. Or you can simply go to linkedin.com/skills, and it's still there. Now, the reason why I'm showing you skills is because this can be a really good way to expand out your concepts. So let's say you're looking for your first iPhone developer ever, and you're like, well, what other words could somebody mention on their profile that an iPhone developer might mention? Well, I'm not saying all of these words are applicable, but if you look at them, and if you're in this area, some of them are. Cocoa, you've got Xcode, you've got several different things that are related to it, plus you can see people. Plus, if you look at the bottom, it shows you groups that are related to iPhone. Plus, on the right, it actually shows you related companies. Just as another example, it isn't just common terms like iPhone. You can throw anything at it, And in most cases, LinkedIn's actually going to have a good list of skills that it thinks are related to it. I threw in that kind of a strange job, mechatronics, and it came up with a pretty good list. Again, I would say about 60 to 70% of the terms in there are actually very good in terms of saying, well, I'm going to turn my quote-unquote mechatronics search into an OR statement of mechatronics plus a number of these terms. Plus, again, in this view, I'm looking at groups at the bottom and companies that obviously employ mechatronics people. And we're almost at the end. LinkedIn Signal, highly underutilized. It still does exist, and I got word from LinkedIn they're not trying to do away with it. The way that you can get to Signal is two different ways. So you'll notice that the image on the bottom left, when you actually go under search, if you click on updates, that is LinkedIn Signal. You can also, similar to skills, just type linkedin.com/signal. What's brilliant is I was recently in Australia and I had a person in a training class say, well, Glenn, I want to know who are all the people who changed the title on their profile to controller? And I'd never done that before, and I said, well, let's go ahead and do it. And that's actually the exact screenshot of what I did live. I simply put in a keyword of controller, and then I chose a specific update type for profile updates. And if you read those, you'll see this person has updated their current title, financial controller. Andrew became a financial controller. So you can actually watch people change jobs or get promoted within companies. And another interesting thing you can do is you can literally watch people add skills to their profile. So just make sure that you're using LinkedIn Signal. It is a fantastic search tool and is definitely part of, I think, any good sourcer's tool belt when it comes to leveraging LinkedIn for sourcing. And last but not least, it's something that I know people are aware of, but people don't use it enough. You can do a one-day search with a premium account, and you can save it so that every day you basically are alerted to all the people who just joined LinkedIn in a particular location that mention what you need. So in this case, I ran a search, and in one day in the U.S. alone, there were 172 people that had joined LinkedIn and actually mentioned Java on their profile. This can be a very good way to, for lack of a better term, pounce on people before they get too far into it, and then every other person that's looking for the same skill finds them. And you can just set it up and you'll get your daily alert. It's brilliant. So I know we started just a couple minutes late, but I think I am a couple minutes early. And I know we're supposed to be stopping soon, but I am happy to take any questions that I'm able to answer along the way.
Great. Thank you so much, Glenn. That is a wealth of information to cover in an hour, and the Twitter feed has been alive with a ton of great feedback and a lot of questions. Since we are close to time, I'm just going to throw two questions at you, and for those who can stay on the line, thanks so much.
Yep.
First question, will my search string integrity be affected if I copy and paste from Microsoft Word?
It can be. It can be if you haven't taken the time to change the quotation marks. You know, Word by default uses those curved quotation marks, but there is a way to go into Word and actually Excel and PowerPoint and change all of those quotes to the straight up and down quotes, the ones that you would see if you actually type them straight into LinkedIn. That would be the best way. To the best of my knowledge, that's the only way that you might actually lose search integrity is if you're using those curved quotes, and LinkedIn and actually any other database, by the way, doesn't like that. They like the straight up and down quotes. So I often recommend people to either change how the quotes, and there's a way to do that through the auto-correct, auto-format options, or you can simply use Notepad, and you'll never run into that problem.
Great, thank you. And final question. In your opinion, do you think it's necessary to buy LinkedIn Recruiter, or do you feel like you can get the same effect with LinkedIn.com?
You know, that's a very hotly contested discussion. You know, there's people that obviously want to use everything in the world for free, and obviously there's many great things you can do with a free account on LinkedIn. I would say it really comes down to return on time invested. You know, I would argue that in many cases there is a significant return on the time investment and even the monetary investment. I think it depends on the company. I think it depends on the scale, the types of positions someone's searching for, and how often they're going to use it. But, you know, I tried to demonstrate in here that obviously there's many things you can use LinkedIn for free, or even some of the lower premium accounts. But when it comes to LinkedIn Recruiter, your ability to add basically candidate metadata and then search on that essentially makes it a very powerful database plus CRM, essentially. So you can tag people, you can put notes and search across those notes, and some of those custom fields are going to be searchable in the future. That's going to allow you to, and this is just factual, it's going to allow you to exert more predictive control over who you get back. And if you value, if you say, wow, having access to LinkedIn Recruiter and being able to use all of the different functionality that is existent in LinkedIn Recruiter might actually help me find a few extra candidates per day, per week, what have you, you might actually be able to come up with a business case and show that, yes, it's well worth the investment. But for me, I want to exert more control over the data. And so I want more filters and I want more search functionality so that I can basically have unfettered access to that Pacific Ocean of human capital data. I know that went long there, but I do want to say, I'm never going to say you have to, but you could literally do an A/B test and have two people in your company and say one person has LinkedIn Recruiter, one has a free account, and then over a 90-day period see who's more productive. And I think the data would bear out that the person that has the ability to more quickly find and engage the right people is always going to have the advantage.
Great. Thank you so much, Glenn. And since we're a little bit over, we're going to thank everyone for staying on the line. Glenn, thank you so much for your time today. Just so everyone knows, we will be distributing the recording after the fact. So that's it for today. Thanks so much, and take care. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you, everybody.